Welcome to Off the Record News. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. Off the Record News is brought to you weekly from the Public Access Studios, SPNN in St. Paul. Now, over the last few programs, we have been providing you news coverage of the Hillcrest Community Advisory Meeting that was held on December 17th, 2019. Now, this is a very important committee meeting to be watching because they are the eyes and ears of the public, of the community, to provide input to the St. Paul Port Authority and to St. Paul as to how to guide the development at the Hillcrest Golf Course site. Now, remember, this particular piece of property was at one time a golf course since about 1921, and then it closed in about 2017. And then the Port Authority, they decided to buy it from the pipe fitters who purchased it for about $4.3 million. So in this whole process, there is a technical committee which is composed of all the consultants, the engineers, all the people behind the scenes making the decisions. Now, those meetings are not open to the public. So the real meetings where the real decisions are being made, unfortunately, we can't bring that information to you because those meetings are non-public. However, the meetings with the Community Advisory Committee members, those meetings are public. So we went to their meeting, we filmed the meeting, we've got about 3 hours of film footage. And now tonight I have with me to help me with the analysis of our film footage and our clips, Mr. Greg Copeland, who is a resident of St. Paul on the east side, who's been watching this subject. Thank you, Mr. Copeland, for being here.
It's always good to be with you. It is always good because, you know, without you, there would be no attention on this development at all. And I would say that there's a bigger piece to this. And that is that they had a lot of meetings that weren't open to the public long before this advisory committee was appointed. Unlike the Ford Motor site on the other side of town in Highland Park, you know, where we had 10 years of process, I think, this 112-acre site, this $10 million expenditure was wrapped up in very short order. I would even call it a bailout of the pipe fitters union and a quick acquisition done during an interim appointment, because notice they didn't try to pull this off when Dan Bostrom was sitting in the Ward 6 chair. This project is in Ward 6. They did it when their DFL appointee, Kasim Busari, that they later rejected because he, dared to run for the council. And so I don't know. I think it's putting the cart in front of the horse to do all the buying up front and to tell people, well, we're going to have 1,000 homes, we're going to have 1,000 jobs, we're going to have an industrial site butting up to people that are living in this, what had been a green site as far as they knew. Nobody thought there was any pollution there, certainly that warranted millions of dollars, $2.5 million worth of cleanup costs when they were a golf course. People moved in and have been living next to a golf course, not a brownfield. And so now we have a government that's put a lot of stress, I think, on the adjoining owners, and it's not just St. Paul, but in Maplewood as well.
Right, and one thing that, and people will notice that the title on our program is What to Do Now. And I think that you certainly brought that forth, in that it was really a rush job to purchase this property. The decisions to make the purchase happened within a year's worth of time before there was really any due diligence about what indeed could be, should be, or thought about how to put the project together or the costs involved. Right. Because certainly when you've spent $10 million on a parcel, and then you know that you're going to have 2.5 million in cleanup costs as well, we're really talking about a purchase cost outlay of that property from the get-go of $12.5 million. And that's a lot of money that hopefully there's going to be some kind of return on.
Well, and it costs money too for the city to sell bonds. This project is the full faith and credit of the city of St. Paul has been pledged for this purchase. And every taxpayer in St. Paul, every homeowner, every business is on the hook for whatever comes out of this. Now, of course, we got the big assurance, and pardon me for being a skeptic, but whenever the Port Authority says we won't be asking for TIF, you know, for the tax increment financing, the subsidy that usually goes along with any other project that they're doing, and I'm not as huge a critic of that type of thing as some people, but when they go up front and they tell the city council when they're at the public hearing and they're saying we need that, by the way, we bought this thing and now we want you to pay for it today. We need the check today, but we're going to be really good to you because we're not going to come back and ask for TIF. Does anybody really believe that?
Right, because how are they going to fund the $2.5 million for the cleanup? Because that's generally one of the tools used for environmental remediation, is using TIF as that type of tool to encourage that cleanup that would not have been done except for the TIF availability.
Well, and in order to use the TIF, you have to make the determination that this blighted golf course exists, not as a golf course, but as a brownfield, essentially. That's the rationale. We've got to go clean up this adjoining property. In order to get the TIF, you have to come up with some facts that
Yes.
give you that entree to that money. And yet the Port Authority miraculously, on this one project, I've never heard them make this upfront project promise before. No TIF, a no TIF project. This will be a good one for the legislature to follow because they'll be able to stay at the legislature. Well, you guys are using way too much TIF. Look at what St. Paul did with no TIF money. I can't wait for that one.
Now, when we went to this meeting with our cameras to film the meeting, there were a few questions like most of the meetings we go to when there hasn't been a city camera or a county camera there. And the folks who run the meetings are wondering, oh, wow, somebody's here with a camera. Now, there is that perception out there that just because you show up at a meeting with a camera, that there's a lot of anxiety, that you cause anxiety in the people who are at the meeting because you have a camera, because you are filming the meeting so that way you can communicate it to the public. Well, I want to show you that is not true. Many of the meetings that we go to, the public and members of the public are actually very pleased that the cameras are there, that we are recording the information that is coming out of those meetings, and that we are communicating then that information to the public. So let's take a look at our first clip.
So what was the channel you said you were filming for?
Put Your Hands Together Productions, but we'll have a show if you want to on, are you live in St. Paul?
No, I live in Minneapolis, but I'm the planning intern.
Okay, St. Paul Neighborhood Network. We'll show maybe tomorrow night if it's.
The meeting was December 17th, 2019. And as our cameraman indicated, we were hoping to get some of the film footage out the next night, December 18th, 2019, to the public, which indeed we did. So our December 18th show here out of SPNN, we had film footage hot from the meeting we'd been to the night before. But as I indicated, we've got 3 hours worth of film footage. So here we are, January, middle of January, and we're only halfway through the film footage. So that's why on a following program, we are going to then run the rest of the film footage in its entirety. So you'll want to watch and look for that on our YouTube channel so that way you can also see the entirety of the meeting. Now let's take a look at our next clip as again there's discussion before the meeting.
Good content. Yeah. None of this stuff you'll ever see in the, you don't see much in the Pioneer Press anymore.
Okay.
But you won't see, this, they had a little bit in the Pioneer Press in this when you guys started, but
Oh, sure.
you won't see any Pioneer Press report, you won't see any of the 2 or 3 Pioneer Press reporters coming to one of these meetings.
Okay.
Even though this is in a good location.
Yeah.
I mean, this is certainly better than the NLCA location up there that they have, I think, the District 2 council meetings. That's up there by Van Dyke, across from the Plaza Theater.
Okay, sure.
Or the district, what is it, District 5, over there at Arlington Hills Library. This is a nice room. This is a nice room, isn't it?
Yes.
This is a great room to have a meeting in.
Yeah. Cool.
So if you ever want to come on.
This meeting was attended only by one media outlet. That was Put Your Hands Together Productions. The Pioneer Press wasn't there. The Star Tribune wasn't there. Nobody else was there. But our media company was there. And also, Mr. Copeland, do you realize at the Ramsey County Truth and Taxation hearing, the Star Tribune and the Pioneer Press, they weren't at that meeting either. And yet, Put Your Hands Together Productions was.
Well, things are a little tough in the media business. I used to be a newspaper reporter for a small small newspaper in Florida when I was just out of school. And, they're just getting to be less of us around, reporters and newspapers. I heard a stat the other day from some media folks that something like 8,000 journalists have, lost their job here in the recent time. So we have some good ones, and they work hard because they've got to make up for all the other people that they used to have that covered all these wonderful people in government doing all these things for us.
Certainly, just because there are fewer journalists doesn't mean that government has stopped working.
Boy, the government has definitely not stopped. No, the government is full of plans for you.
Now, next we have the film footage of when the chair of the committee came into the meeting, and you can see that she is very relaxed with the camera.
So, Linda Higgins.
Hi, Kevin, how are you?
Good to see you. I haven't seen you for 25 years.
Yeah, about that.
You've stayed out of the limelight.
I stayed real low, yeah. Being called a tree hugger was
Yes.
kind of put an end to it.
Yes.
What are you doing?
Well, we're still doing cable access. So
Oh, yeah?
hopefully we got some good clips for tomorrow night. We're doing this one tomorrow night on the same Paul Neighborhood Network. But
Okay.
It's on YouTube too. 3
Okay.
hours a week.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Huh.
Because Maplewood never stops giving.
Yeah.
You don't know, like I was just telling you, Nora Salwick, you've seen she was elected for mayor. She
Yeah.
was 14 years. She, she signed an affidavit that she lived in the city of Maplewood because she owns that property on Lake Palin.
Yeah.
But she's been living in Lake Elmo. And they all know it.
Yeah.
All the public officials,
Yeah.
all the,
But didn't she quit after she got elected and went to work for Walls, and now she quit that?
yeah, because of stress.
Yeah.
It's amazing how everybody is real fascinated in Nora Slawick and the fact that she jumped ship in Maplewood, went over to the Met Council, and then jumped ship there too. Who knows what the answer is?
Yeah,
but it's fascinating. Everybody wants to know. You know how many people ask me, oh, what's the inside scoop on why Nora left? And I can only say, well, I've heard rumors, but I can't repeat them.
Well, now, she said it was because of health, so maybe she wants to govern a smaller municipality like Lake Elmo, for example.
Could very well be true. Now, we're going to return to where we left off last week in our report on the meeting. We are about 45 minutes or so into the meeting where a number of the committee members were giving ideas about how to get the input from the community, because in this whole process, many of the members of the advisory committee, they are focused on how can we get the information out to the community, the members of the community, and then get their feedback on the different options that are being considered, so that these different options can be vetted and we can find out what suits the community and the character of the community and the wishes of the community. So many of the members of this advisory committee, this is the focus that they have. And then there are a number of people who are on the committee who are looking at it more from the perspective of how does the government usually run their outreach programs, in ways that some people question whether or not you get meaningful input at all. And so that's where we left off last week. And we heard comments about how one can use and implement, as part of this input process, gatherings where people use pipe cleaners to put together the models of what they'd like to see at the development. Now, you may not believe that clip actually exists, or you may have missed it. So we're going to play it one more time so you can hear these comments and see and hear for yourself the idea that the government should be using pipe cleaners as part of their outreach and getting meaningful input from the community.
I'll tag on to what Coot said.
Okay.
They have to have bought into it first,
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if they don't understand the value of it, if they aren't gonna put the energy in it, because everybody, especially this time of year, has way more to do. So I think the first step is to get an introductory plan. I wanna make sure Ann has a chance to throw out ideas too. We can.
Sure. We actually, on Payne Avenue, just did a community engagement process on November 21st and then again on November 30th. And it was a combination of things. So we had artisans and crafters selling things, so it was an opportunity. We had a gallery, and then the vendors. That was to bring people in. But then we had a survey with only 5 questions. And then we also had a selfie wall that kind of got kind of
So something
popular.
to socially bring them in.
Little, you know, those props that they use and people,
Mhm.
and then
Portable.
we had videotaping, so people, and also questions at the videotaping too, and it was about your community, how do you feel about your community, what would you like to see change, what's missing, what's, you know, and so, but not a ton of questions, just, it was the initial engagement piece to get, and it was pretty successful. The second day was during a snowstorm, and we still got people. But anyway, that's one idea. I went to another one that was very interactive one. They had, first they had a PowerPoint of different communities that had projects, whether it was a placemaking project or a park that they built or a school or, you know, and so they did a quick like videotape, and then they had a bunch of stuff like knickknacks and pipe cleaners and Legos and craft materials. They had a lot of stuff that obviously was purchased at like a secondhand thrift shop. And they asked and there were teams to build, and you had to pick out, oh, I have to build a house, or I have to build a park, or I have to do transit, or, you know, they had different topic areas. So they picked one, and then they had to, you know, use all this stuff and create that. And we had 2 artists sitting at the table here, and art is my passion. Using art as a community engagement tool is very effective. And it was the interaction and the engagement. The other thought I had was a big map. The big map as big as this table, maybe, of Hillcrest.
Yeah.
And overhead, you know, where people can really get familiar, because you can drive around it. And until you go on that Google app that
Or have the
told
chance
us
to
about,
develop it.
it was just, it's hard, it's really hard to get a concept of it, but, you know, it's like, wow, this really is big. So, just some thoughts, kind of random.
2 key words there: interaction and engagement.
What about Legos?
Yes, and what does that mean? I mean, what is the quality of the interaction and the engagement? And I think in that clip by itself, you can see the contrast between the two philosophies, because Ms. Higgins, chair of the committee, she was talking about, well, how do we get the information out to the people so that if they have information, then they can actually give some kind of advice or recommendations or opinion on what should be done. I mean, to me, that makes sense. Give them the details of the site, of the demographics, of the opportunities, and then from there, get that engagement and that interaction. The other method that we heard was the artsy craftsy way. We're going to form teams, have Legos, build houses, and oh gee, that's going to give us an idea of what people would like to see. Mr. Copeland, your analysis of these two different ways to approach citizen engagement in a very costly development.
It seems to me, Diana, that things have really slipped in the planning world. You know, our graduate schools of public administration are producing people now that are reduced to planning our futures with Legos and pipe cleaners. Are you serious? You know, honestly, St. Paul, before we had all these intellects down there at the planning department, you know, we had district councils that were formed, and district councils took it upon themselves to make sure that people got notices of public meetings where the public that lives in the community could come to a meeting and ask their questions of public officials, make their points of view known, make their concerns known, or share their dreams, whatever it is. But you know, there was a direct communication, not a communication with some bureaucrats in an office, but a communication between citizens that vote and citizens that pay taxes and citizens that actually live next to this now apparently a brownfield, and that they've got their homes and their investment and everything tied up in. And instead of simply having a public meeting and getting you know, the Port Authority perhaps to pay for the flyers and the staffing to go out and contact these people directly and have some conversations with people that actually live next to this property. I mean, this does not seem like a problem that requires a solution that involves anything called pipe cleaners or Legos.
Right. Well, I think the hardest problem is how do you get enough information out to the public so that they can give meaningful input. And this is especially difficult if you've spent many years trying to decrease the amount of information that you get to the public so that they won't get too involved and engaged. And you see, that's part of the conflict that's been created here, is that on the one hand, there are processes set up within the government structure to limit the amount of input and information and knowledge that the general population has about what are the policy decisions and how are the decisions being made. And then you get to a point like this and you say, oh, but now we want public engagement. Well, the public has been totally disengaged. Wow. So now how do you bring them back to square one to say, okay, now let's go back a few years and really start talk about some of the public policies that have been created on the east side that got us to the point where we are today, and where did we make a couple of false steps, and how did we make a couple of good steps? And see, that whole process, you can't put that into one session saying, okay, we're going to do a selfie wall, and you get to take a picture next to your little bunny rabbit that you made with your pipe cleaners because you support having park and greenland in the space.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't anticipated what we were going to do with those pipe cleaners. She was talking about transit too, and now we got to talk about our bunnies. You know, folks, honestly, I think we're trying to make this difficult, and it's not. Back in the 70s, and I remember those days, it wasn't long ago. Thank you very much. Anyway, but you know, this is when the federal government told the city of St. Paul, if you want this development money from Uncle Sam, you got to do some things to bring the public in on the decision-making process. And that's how we got to having district councils. And I speak as a guy that used to be the president of his district council in the Payne District 5 area. And frankly, as I say, this is not rocket science. It requires a little creative effort. But with our technology today, with digital communications, with the Nextdoor feature that we have that's tied in with many of our leaders and politicians, and we have all kinds of advanced mailing systems and social media. I mean, I'm coming at this maybe from an older perspective with the old pamphlets and whatnot, but, extend that out to all the social media, to the Nextdoor site. You can get this meeting packed in a hurry. We've done it before, with, for instance, crime issues on the east side. A couple of summers ago, there were a lot of garage doors being broken into and people were losing their property. We communicated through Nextdoor, and we had 50 people down at the East Side team office, and the people down there said, where'd you guys all come from? And we said Nextdoor. Well, and the police department hadn't even heard of Nextdoor. They were using some other social media. I'm glad to tell you now that they are using Nextdoor. It's a good system, and it engages people where they are, and that's great, and that's what we should be doing more of. And it doesn't cost the city a dime. This is all part of the magic of today's technology. So, this is not hard work, but you have to also have something come ahead of this, I think, and that is a recognition that the city didn't act perhaps in the best interest. And I'm thinking definitely they didn't, because they didn't ask the public ahead of time. Do you want us to spend your money, which you're going to be taxed for, to buy this piece of property and to do whatever is in the minds of the people at the Port Authority?
And so when you go out to the market and you're doing an arm's length transaction, and the new purchaser of this property is going into it saying, well, let's see, boy, I'm going to have cleanup costs, and why should the seller be making over 100% profit, as well as getting rid of an environmental nightmare? What kind of negotiation happened there? And that's what I would like to know. So we're never going to know that, because the insiders are just doing wink, wink, nod, nod, and that's how it happened.
Right.
But you've got to ask those questions, just because there's got to be somebody accountable. Certainly the city council, when they certainly knew of this. They've got two of their city council members who are on the board of the St. Paul Port Authority. Don't you think that they give little reports and say, well, I went to the meeting and they were talking about?
Well, and the Port Authority is chaired by a former deputy mayor under Chris Coleman, and who's now, I believe it's, I'm trying to think of the name of the outfit he's with, Paul. But in any event, I can't recall the name of it. But they're working on trying to help people in poverty, interestingly enough, if you go to the website of our St. Paul Port Authority, which is an arm of city government, in effect, they talk about being the poverty busters. Well, I think that's fabulous. We want to bust poverty, and God knows it's made a big home. That is, poverty has made a big home on the east side. And it seems to be something that we've got a problem getting rid of. So to the extent that problem will be solved by doing something good on this site is great. But I think you also have to respect the interests of the people that are invested in the community in which this land sits. And to basically ignore that and now only get interested in it because, well, we've got the land and we've got a committee. That's nice, but we need more than that. I think the committee would be well advised to call a public meeting, get the public involved as soon as possible in this process, because they've been left out up until now. And putting a seat warmer city council member on in Ward 6, and then having some of the veteran people congratulating what a great job he did leading the purchase, and then he doesn't even show up for the meeting at which the purchase was consummated by the city, in effect, where they agreed to pay the $10 million after it had already been bought by the Port Authority. And the other thing, going to your point too, Diana, about the property itself and the negotiation on a price. Clearly that property had been for sale for a long, long time, and there weren't any takers. And maybe it was because of the fertilizer-based pollution situation, but maybe it was because the imagination of whoever was in the marketplace wasn't sparked. I don't know, but the reality is they had a liability not only for the pollution, but they had a liability on their hands for this whole property, their whole investment, which they couldn't get rid of. And then they want to get a premium of whatever it was here, the percentages. I mean, this is too good. And that's what an inside deal is all about, folks, is when the public dollars are used to bail out the friends of the people that are doing the buying at the final hour of an election, it coincide right with the election. It just stinks. And frankly, the credibility of the city is wanting on this whole deal. And the Port Authority ought to be ashamed of itself, frankly, for all the congratulations about the opportunities of the property. And that's true. There are opportunities there. This isn't the way the city of St. Paul or the Port Authority should be doing business.
Now we have additional film footage, and so let's move on to our next clip where we hear some more discussion from the community advisory members.
Can I share one more? The East Side Coalition for Wellness and Health or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Words in some order. They've been doing a lot of different things, but one of the programs is around community wellness, and they have ambassadors from multiple cultures that go out into those neighborhoods and see how people are doing.
Yeah, that's the Health East Initiative, I believe. The East Side Health and Wellness
Oh,
Coalition.
right.
Yeah.
There's a whole
Yeah.
coalition of organizations.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah,
Health
they do
East
East Side
Community.
Table and
Yeah.
Correct, and a lot of those coalitions are usually the biggest nonprofit.
Now this is very consistent with comments another member made earlier in the meeting, where in a project that he was involved in, that members of the ethnic community that he's a part of, that they actually went out into the community and talked to people at their homes to get their ideas, to get their input on the development that was going on. And here we hear that theme coming through again, that here's an organization that a model they used was that they had people go out to the homes to reach people, not expecting that people are going to come to some engagement event to fiddle with pipe cleaners and Legos, but that actually there's the work and the effort to go out into the community to find the folks who want to say something or who don't realize that their input is valuable because they've been disengaged so long, they don't realize anybody wants to hear what they have to say. What would be more conclusive that somebody wants to hear what you have to say than they knock on your door and say, hey, I'm from this committee, we're working on this, what are your ideas? Come to this meeting, we want to hear from you, or we want to hear from you now. Well, let's continue with our next clip.
Biggest community activists, which we all love, because actually I'm one of them too. So like, it really depends, right? So like getting them into one room and just really divvying up, I think it would be probably one of the most effective instead of going from neighborhoods, one person to the next, or one community member to the next, and really just kind of thinking about the biggest impact, killing like 10 birds with one stone, working with the community, the people who work in the community most.
I think it should be a multifaceted approach to that.
Well, yeah, of course, that would be one phase of it.
Also get a little uncomfortable, so Cole, to your point about like, can we send out a survey for people to now fill out the survey? I think historically that hasn't gone well, for especially for communities of color. And when you think about the east side of the demographics, you're taking some like information from people to do what with it, especially if you're not going to utilize it. So I don't recommend that approach. I think also to your point, I think it would be really cool to see some of the leaders like, you know, Merrick and who have, or there's like an East Side Funders group who are like philanthropists who work in the area that kind of are like fund some of this work that you'll see out here in the community, and then of course the schools here locally. I think when you think about drop off and pick up, these people have the potential to purchase, like this is Starbucks, they're going to go on there or wait for their kid at activities and stuff like that, so that's going to have an impact. So I think there's an opportunity for sure to like partner with Hill Murray and then of course Mount Park Academy. I mean, again, you're thinking about 500 at each school. That's a lot of parents coming out of that area.
Now these two ladies, again, along that same theme, they are saying you need to go to where the people are at. You can't be expecting that just handing them a survey is going to do it. Of course, we heard that some of the folks who are the consultants, that's the first thing that they turn to, is say, let's put out a survey. Well, these ladies are saying, you know, people are busy. They're busy dropping off their kids at school. Where are they? They're waiting for the kids someplace. They're tied up doing something else. So you need to go where they're at, so that you can get that input. And there's this difference, this conflict between well, let's just give them a little event to go through, to a pop-up, or to do a survey, versus let's go out into the community and really find the community. I mean, it goes to your idea of, you know, using the district councils, and in this case, the district council for this district, to really tie them into what is going on, because they went to the meeting to become part of the district council. They're just volunteers from their neighborhood. They are involved with their neighborhood. Wouldn't they be the first people to approach in this process?
Well, sure, and the level of interest and the nature of people's interest is going to vary depending on how close they are, I think, to the actual site. Obviously, as I recall, the golf course, the Hillcrest property is fenced, and you know, there are people whose backyards line up right against it. Those are some obvious folks that have a unique and special interest, because it will directly affect the value of their property and the quality of their lives. Whereas people who are further away, who maybe are renting, might see this as a place to one day, because they're talking about 1,000 new homes. I mean, they being the Port Authority. I'm not making this up. I'm just repeating what they've said. Not necessarily because I believe it, but in any event, I think people that don't have a job are going to be interested in it, because they talk about 1,000 new jobs. Now, of course, that job isn't going to be here tomorrow, or those houses aren't going to be here tomorrow either. But to the extent that people are interested in building community where they're at, they'll participate. And that's perfectly legitimate, you know, input. And it ought to be sought out on the front end, as we've said, and you said you know, the water is already flowing under this bridge, so here we are. But why not take advantage of all these tools? And I think, you know, we're assuming too, because we follow public affairs, and the people in that room, those advisory people, sought to be on that committee, so they're following it too. They know what's going on. But as you pointed out, Diana, most of the citizens on the east side, you know, we used to have the East Side Review, as limited as an impact that it had, it's gone now. So there's that whole way of contacting people to tell them what is the current situation and what money's involved, because unless you were reading the Pioneer Press on the various days that they wrote the 3 or 4 stories that they had last September, you don't know anything about this.
Right, and they have no article whatsoever on this very important advisory committee who's having these discussions.
Well, that's the beauty of put your hands together media, because you're filling the void that newspapers used to take on, essentially. I mean, sincerely, because nowadays the media doesn't have the capacity in this town in St. Paul with the Pioneer Press, with a hedge fund operator that has been slicing and dicing off pieces of the newspaper all the time that they've owned it, shrinking the staff. So it's important that people get involved, and you've said many times people could volunteer to work on the show. You could use another cameraman or two to cover more meetings. I know, because poor Kevin, he's working his butt off all the time with that camera. But so this is an opportunity not only to go to meetings, but to participate in covering meetings and build some capacity on the east side to kill that old poverty tiger and to create a better community.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's continue with our next clip as they continue their discussion.
And they'd be active rather than the public school, because they're private schools and they've got more of the
Resources.
Yeah. What's the right word?
I would just say when you approach some of these organizations to partner with, just be careful when you're asking them to kind of like do some of the work for you.
That's what I meant. They've got they aren't buying into it. It's like,
like there's nothing in there for them. They don't get any sort of additional funding to do the work. Then it's like, well, why am I doing your work for you when you're already getting a huge contract from the portfolio?
And then there is the Small Business Association.
Yeah,
White Bear
Yeah.
Avenue Business Association. I can't speak to how active they would be with something like this though, so. They like their parade and that's.
Well, there's that one, but there's also.
Now, earlier in the meeting, there was some discussion by some of the consultants asking about what organizations or nonprofits in the community can help with this process. And as the gentleman there was indicating, you got to be a little careful that if you're going to be asking a nonprofit or some other organization in the community to be helping with this project and this outreach, they're going to be expecting something in return. They're not necessarily just doing it out of the goodness of their heart. And it isn't just the same as getting that community input of the residents in the community. So there again, that's another little wrinkle that we hear in this discussion at this meeting about who's going to do the legwork of getting the input from the community. Is it going to be the members of this advisory committee that are going to go door to door to talk to people? Is it going to be that they're going to sign up some nonprofits to hold a couple of open houses so the Port Authority can put up poster boards and have pipe cleaners available? We don't know, because you see all of this stuff is in flux, because who's in charge to actually make these decisions as to how they're going to go about doing it? Ultimately, it's the consultants and the technical team who have their private meetings that are non-public that make all those decisions.
Well, the other thing that occurs to me while you're speaking about those things, Diana, is the contrast between the Ford plant discussions that have taken years and the community in which those discussions took place, Highland. They've got this little newspaper out there that is an excellent community newspaper that does a great job every 2 weeks. It's out there, The Villager. And everybody knows it, and it ties the community together. Their community council out there is one of the most active in the city, without a doubt. Many leaders from that council have become members of the city council. So it's a different thing. And the economic profile that the people in Highland have versus the east side is day and night. We have lots of capacity, and we want to do greater things, but right now, we need a lot of public support for a successful process to take place. And the other thing I think you're going to find is, we've got a lot of businesses on White Bear Avenue, for example, that have been waiting for something to happen. Whether it's in Maplewood or in St. Paul. I mean, the Hafner's bowling alley that got torn down years ago. People thought great things were going to happen. We got the sandwich trucks there during the day. That's about it that's happening on that site. And that's not acceptable. And I think you're going to see some business people in the community wondering, well, it's great that you guys are investing in buying this 112-acre golf course, but what about the White Bear Commercial District that's been neglected for years? What do you...
And keep in mind, the distance between these two locations is probably about a mile, or maybe even less.
Less, yeah.
And you make a good point in that whole strip of White Bear Avenue where the Hafner bowling alley was long ago, that is indeed just been left by the wayside. And that's on a transportation corridor,
Yes.
a tremendous transportation corridor, which would make you feel that, well, why couldn't they have invested, well, $5 million into that, and then only paid $5 million for the Hillcrest golf course property? You see, was this the best use of their whole wad of cash? That's a good question. Again, a question we will not know the answer to, but we'll leave it to our viewers to come to their own opinion. Well, let's continue with our film footage.
But East Side area businesses,
Yeah, they saw this part.
they have like this weekly blog that they give out to all their members and
Is it
beyond.
Linda or is it Linda? No, that's right. I get the email.
Oh, it's, well, Harris Dunning is the director, but he, there's a lot of contributors to that.
You mentioned the parade. Are there any community events in January, February that you know of?
Yeah.
That one's hard.
For me, I was thinking about that. I don't know of anything.
But there's not a lot.
Yeah.
I don't, like the Hayden Heights Recreation Center will have things, but I can't speak how well those are attended. So if you're trying to talk to people.
The Port Authority held a meeting there. Was that coming up? I was thinking it was something about this because it was on my next door that the Port Authority was having.
Now, the one lady was talking about the East Side Business Association, and then there's a White Bear Avenue Association, Business Association, and of course that they have their parade. Well, the consultant is like, oh, you mentioned a parade. Well, are there any other events similar to that? As if they're going to put a pop-up at a parade so that they can get meaningful input. Now, of course, you're going to have some people stop by and pick up a couple of flyers, but that's not really the type of engagement that's in depth from the community that is got the depth to it. I mean, you'll get superficial comments, but is that all they're looking for? They want to give the illusion that the public's been invited, but not so much that the result is different when the technical team says is going to happen. You see what's going on here.
Well, and when you don't follow the process as you should, you end up with this kind of problem where the resentment of business people that have invested in and are operating businesses on White Bear Avenue, they're left behind. There's no discussion about maybe we should have spent some money on their businesses before we bought this, or we should do the two together, or is there an overall plan? Because no, they went out and spent the $10 million bailing out their buddies who are on the pipe fitters union that have this liability. So that's a problem. The other thing that is so painfully obvious here is these consultants have no familiarity with the east side. You know, it always is surprising to me why it is that the government always wants to bring in somebody that knows nothing about the area that they're assigned to work in. How is that magnificent? How does that make any sense? Why do we not bring in some people who live in the community to get this, you know, game in play here? And why take up all this lead time to get somebody up to snuff, and then, oh, by the way, they just took another job at some other consultants before they even get done with this project. So, you know, there's a lot of things here that need management and need close attention. And frankly, I'm given the years that I've been around the east side, it's going to take some people making a lot of noise to keep the public's attention. We have a new city council member on the east side in Ward 6, and we've got Jane Prince in Ward 7 that's involved in this project as well. And the mayor could provide some leadership with his departments, certainly. But
and one thing that I would like to see is that I would like to see that those technical advisory meetings, the non-public meetings, that they be public. That would be the best way to educate the public what the discussions are about the site. What are the considerations? What are they looking at? That is the best way to get the information to the public if you truly want the public to be informed, is to have those technical meetings open to the public, open to our cameras, so that we can film their discussions and then be able to understand their perspective. Because as it is, all we can see is what we have in front of us today.
yeah, and frankly, I think if they would shift into reverse a little bit here, because they did put that cart in front of those horses. And frankly, the question I have is, well, what are all these technical people going to be doing that relates to the public if they don't know what the public wants? You know, they're going to be coming up with their pristine plan that they might submit to their professor for their doctorate degree in city planning. But that has little to do with the result that the people on the east side need. So I think they could, maybe they could do a little better with their doctorate plan and actually go out and do the legwork, have the conversations with the people that live next to the green fence that surrounds Hillcrest, both in Maplewood and in St. Paul. And there has to be some public investment here. There has to be some commitment of resources to make these things happen.
Now, in our next clip, we hear from one of the consultants.
You know, it's supposed to be very robust, and we're supposed to, you know, do the paper communications, the online communications, the in-person communications at all scales. And in the beginning, you know, we do tell the story of the place and what the opportunities are, what's happening there, what it is now, and we listen to their stories, because everyone has a story about it, some sort of relationship with it. And then from there, that's where you start to build trust, and then hopefully start getting information back.
Now, this clip is very important because this consultant, in the end, talks about the trust factor, which is exactly what we've been touching on. In response to that, we hear from the chair of the committee, who picks up on the use of the word trust. And we're going to hear her comments.
You just said a word that is part of the issue, and that is trust. And no offense, Port Authority, there's a whole bunch of people that don't trust you guys, and or the city of St. Paul. Because right away they think, well, they're just going to do what they want to do. I've had friends say to me, why are you even doing that? They're just going to do what they want to do anyway.
Right. And I think that's where somebody said, I forget who it was, but somebody said we need to circle back to the community and say, this is what you said, and this is where it directly affected this design.
Yeah. Your idea, or someone's idea is here.
And that can happen with these traveling displays. Like, these comments are going to be on there, and then as we morph it into a symbol, like an idealistic design or whatever.
Because it goes to the heart of what we've been talking about, that conflict between, is there enough information out so that the public can understand what is going on, so that they can have trust? Or do they just keep everything in the back room and say, we're just going to weather the storm of the lack of trust? Mr. Copeland, any comments you have on the trust factor?
Yeah, I think that's critical with anything the government does, especially picking up on some of the comments that the young ladies were making earlier on in the program with regard to the reluctance of people to just be hit with this at the door, for example, or at some community meeting, about what input when they don't know that it's even occurring. So they're going to be very, unable, I think, to engage without having basic information on the project. So just simply taking some time to inform the community about what the city's done and what it costs, be honest up front, and what some of the concepts are. And it might be a time for the Port Authority to educate the East Siders who may not be familiar, because we have a lot of turnover in our community. There's a lot of transient, there's people that stay here for 28 years in my case, and there's people that were born here, and there's people who just got here yesterday and they don't know how long they're staying.
And one thing that they could do, of course, they could certainly post documents of all types on a website that is particularly dedicated to this development. However, not everybody has the internet. And so you've got a wonderful library there, the Arlington Library, that is only a short distance from there, where they could actually post all those documents and have them available at the library. So then people could go to the library and see the documents and actually provide input through the library system and have a way that people could write through in their comments as a result of reading documents.
And the libraries, have always served that purpose in St. Paul of public education on civic issues, and certainly the White Bear Library branch, the Sunray branch, would all be potential places to involve in addition to Arlington Hill.
Right, and certainly the public is invited and welcome at the public library. Well, Mr. Copeland, I want to thank you very much for coming on the program this evening.
Love to be with you, Dana.
And viewers, thank you very much for tuning in. Hope you've enjoyed this program. And watch at the end of our program where we show you how to find the programs on YouTube so you can subscribe and be notified of the new uploads. Thank you once again. Bye-bye.
I'm gonna piggyback on Tiffany. You're right. I wouldn't go to a community because I have kids event, but I will definitely respond to a social media video that will make me cry. And then I will put in my little comments and say this is how I feel. So as I was thinking about it clearly, maybe a quick history. Now we need your input with a call out. And then we want to hear the whole. We want to hear from you. Yeah. If you care about this community, come this time. Different 3 dates, whatever it is. Add comments. Any comments below we will put into consideration, and that could potentially be something where I would definitely say don't the 35 up with a lot of young children would be a lot more responsive to. Right. And that there is still a community engagement, especially with social media being so advanced nowadays, being able to target very, very specific Big Brother stuff. But